Well, good morning. It is time for us to begin our Bible study. We're in Revelation chapter 17, and we're going to be picking up in verse 8 this morning. Revelation 17, we're going to be picking up in verse 8. I hope that you've been studying over the course of this week and looking over some of the things that were in your outline from Wednesday night concerning this second portion of the chapter. It is a little bit difficult. We're going to talk about some things that maybe you've heard before, and we tie that in here. We'll give it a shot. I think it is understandable. I think, obviously, God would not give us a book that we weren't intended to understand and some concepts here that we weren't intended to get. So we're going to look at that here beginning in verse 8. But we do want to begin with a word of prayer as we start. Let's pray. Oh Lord our God, we're so thankful for your love. We're thankful for who you are and for what you do for us. Father, may we humble ourselves before your great and awesome hand. May we come to you in humility and strive to be those that are poor in spirit, to be those who are meek and gentle, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. We know that you provide a reward that is great, a reward, Father, that if we persevere, we can have at the end of humanity, when the consummation will take place and Jesus will return to judge the living and the dead. May we look forward to that day, and may we live faithfully till the end. In Jesus we pray, and amen. So John's been given kind of the overall vision in the first 7 verses of the book. That's the first part, right? He sees a woman. She is described as a harlot or a prostitute. She is sitting on a scarlet beast, or she is riding, if you will, a scarlet beast. And this beast has 7 heads, 10 horns. In chapter 13, we're told that the beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. And that's what we're going to talk about now for the next 35 minutes or so. Verses 8 through 11 deal with the 7 heads. That's all we're going to talk about for this portion. Wednesday night, we're going to look at the 10 horns and what they mean. But first, let's talk about the 7 heads. But he prepares us for the 7 heads by telling us this in verse 8. The beast that you saw was and is not, is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, they will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not, and will come. Gotta flash forward to the new slide. The beast is said that he was, he is not, he is about to come up. Does that remind you of anything in Revelation? Does that phrase kind of just spark something in your mind? Wait a minute, we've heard that before. You want to? Revelation 11 talks about it. In Revelation 11, in verse 7, when they have finished the testimony, the beast comes up out of the abyss. He will make war with them. But the phrase itself, just look at the wording here, was, before, is not talking about the present, about to come future. Every time God is described in Revelation, he is most often described in his eternal sense. He is the Alpha, he is the Omega. He was, or who were, who is, and who is to come. That's how God, the Father, the King, the sovereign Lord of Lords, who created the heaven and the earth, that's how he is referred to. Remember Jesus in Revelation chapter 1, he talks about himself as the one who was dead is alive, and he will reign even to the end. When the book comes to a close in chapter 22, that's how he's also described, as the beginning and as the end. In Revelation chapter 4 and in verse 8, John sees the one sitting on the throne, God the Father. And this is how he is described. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God, the Almighty, who was, who is to come. The devil and his allies, they're doing it again. They're trying to mimic God. This is an intended parody on the eternal description of God. This beast is trying to assert itself as if though it was eternal, as if though it is God, and the revelation is telling us clearly he's not, with one phrase, is not, which is just really blunt and out in the open, but also that he is about to go to destruction. First of all, this beast, right, he was said to be killed in Revelation chapter 13. And we know that he was killed because the Bible tells us in chapter 12 that Jesus' death and resurrection gave him the death blow. But he was said to be healed. He was apparently healed, and the whole earth was amazed in verse 4, and they worshiped the beast. That, right, seems to be giving you an impression of some sort of a resurrection. They're mimicking God. The beast had power before, it didn't at some point, and then it seems to have power again. It's difficult to pin down the beast's power in terms of the rising and falling to a particular time in history during the Roman Empire. The beast, we said, is a metaphor. It represents in Revelation the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire saw some great emperors during its early reign. For example, Julius Caesar, Octavian, Augustus, his adopted son. And then it kind of died down for a little bit, right? Tiberius was pretty good. He was the emperor during Jesus' time. Wasn't as great as the other ones before. After him, you had Gaius or Caligula. Then after Caligula, you have Claudius, who expelled the Jews in Acts chapter 18. And you have Nero, who comes to the throne, and he seems to be pretty powerful. And then you have just a series of kings that they were just pitiful. Guys killing each other, trying to seize the throne. There was no adhesive nature to the kingdom at that time. Actually, a lot of Romans thought that was the end of it. They thought that their time as Rome was coming to an end. But then Vespasian, he comes to the throne, right? The Flavian dynasty begins. And then you have Titus, and then Domitian, and Severus, and Trajan, and it keeps getting better and better. Do you see what I'm describing there? A wave. A rising, and a falling, and then a rising. That's what John's describing for us in verse 8. He was, is not, is about to come. From a citizen perspective, right? Can you imagine? From a citizen... Don't imagine, you know. Look at the history of your country, the United States of America. I say your country, I'm not a citizen. But the United States of America has had some great presidents, right? It's had some wonderful presidents, right? The 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. A lot of people think he's the greatest president to ever live. You got guys like the Roosevelts. They did a pretty good job, some people would say, during wartime. Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin D. Roosevelt. A lot of people thought JFK was going to be the greatest president. Fortunately, he was killed before he could spend his entire term doing what he said would, I think, great things in his inauguration speech. Then, of course, you got a lot of people who would tell you that President Obama was the greatest, or President Bush, or Clinton. So everybody has their opinion, right? But from a purely material standpoint, there were some great presidents in U.S. history where this economy was booming like it was ever before. The dollar was stronger than it has ever been before. And then you had some times where you had like the Great Depression, right? Under a certain president, things weren't going that well. Under a certain president, you had war, and things just seemed gloomy, right? rise and fall. That's what you're going to get with world powers. They're never going to be consistent over time because you're dealing with man. Let's be honest. Man can't really be consistent because man's not God. And so that's the point that we're making here, right? He's not, he's about to come up. So Revelation, as you think about it, especially in the early chapters, is Revelation not anticipating the rise of persecution? In Revelation chapter 2 and in verse 10, the Bible tells us, "Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life." Some of you are about to be thrown into prison 10 days. Be faithful. In chapter 3, to the church at Philadelphia, "Be faithful, and because you've been faithful, I will keep you from the hour of great trial that is about to come up upon the earth." In chapter 6 and verse 11, the fifth seal is torn. The souls that have been slain, they're crying out from under the altar, "How long, God, until you avenge our blood?" The response? Wait a little while longer until some of your fellow servants have been killed. That's anticipating persecution to come. Chapter 11, verse 7 and 8. The beast is about to come up out of the abyss. Future tense. Hasn't quite happened yet. Chapter 13 says the same thing. So, John's writing approximately 90 to 95 AD. Roman emperor at that time is Domitian. Was it a systematic persecution as far as we can tell during his time? But the next two emperors were persecuting Christians very systematically. So from that perspective, the saints got this right around 995 AD. So they knew shortly to come that there was going to be this great revival of Roman power that they would have to withstand, and some of them were going to be killed for that. Now, anytime you see that word abyss, it's a bad word. In fact, the first time we saw it was in Revelation chapter 9, and the abyss is described as the realm of the devil, the realm of the destroyer, the realm of demonic forces. The beast, what does he do? He destroys. He makes war. He is devilish. He is demonic. In fact, he does work with the devil, so that does make him devilish from that perspective. And he destroys and he makes war with those who hold fast to the word of God. Now, you're going to want to remember that, because in chapter 20, that phrase is going to be applied to the devil. The exact same phrase is going to be applied to Satan in chapter 20. And what's going to happen to the devil and to the beast and the false prophet in chapter 20? All three of them are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. Why? Because they were trying to ascend themselves to be God. And what happens when you try to be like God? Well, God will show you who is really God. He will destroy you and show you the pitiful, miserable failure that you really are. The book of Daniel pictures this beast as one who will persecute God's people. Daniel chapter 7, verses 25 and 26. But he rises only to be destroyed by God. Can you imagine that? Maybe, just maybe, you get to enjoy the pride and the gloating that goes along with gluing together your empire. Can you imagine, right? All the kings before you, they were okay. But you're going to be pictured as the king that ascends to power, and you are bringing Romans together, and you're making the Roman Empire as great as it was in the beginning in the days of Julius Caesar and Octavian. That's what the future emperors were perceived as. Guys like Trajan and Severus and some of the guys following them, they were perceived as the great kings of the Roman Empire that brought it all together. It was like they were reliving their glory days almost. Well, that's going to only lead to their destruction. It's sad, right, when you think of it from that perspective. They think they're the best thing that's ever happened since sliced bread, only to realize God's going to throw them in hell. Wow, right? That's what Revelation gives you a picture of. It's not just about what you see, but it's also about what happens behind the scenes. So the beast comes up out of the abyss and goes to destruction. Now, for the people that are on earth, they're seeing all this unfold. What's their response, right? They're like, whoa, this is really powerful stuff. This is great stuff. We've never seen anything like this before. And so they worship the beast. It's the same idea from chapter 13. They're amazed and they're caught up with the power and the material things, and because of that, they're going to be destroyed too. Their names are not written in the book of life. That's all we need to know about them. They have no concern about the true God. They have no concern about salvation. They have no concern about spiritual things. They just want the physical. They want the quick high. And for that, God will pay them, right? He will give them the consequences of their sin. All right, any thoughts or comments on verse 8? Steve?
As we go through this is the culmination of the overall plan God has had for his people and what the eventual things coming.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when we read some of the other epistles of the New Testament, it's not just John that's writing about this. Peter writes about this coming stuff. Paul writes about it.
Absolutely.
They all see this coming.
Yeah.
Now, you might say the book of Revelation is right in the midst of all of this stuff that was coming, that they were warning about, was trying to destroy it.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, it's the same thing that we see where we talk about in Hebrews, the 11th chapter,
Yeah.
the 12th chapter, that up and down through God's people. They see periods of time, like when the church first began, there was a great movement towards following after Christ.
Yeah.
Then you have the persecution that comes after. And if you're a person of faith, it seems sometimes unjust things happen. Sure, we would like things to be perfect, like it was in the garden, but as you say, it never comes out.
Yeah.
God's people have to deal with the fact that we're living in an imperfect world with people that don't belong with God and not planning ever to serve God.
Yeah.
And you have to maintain your faith during the easy times, but even more especially, your faith is really tested when you are challenged with things you don't know what the final outcome is going to be.
Absolutely.
And what's going to happen to you and those around you.
Yeah. And that's what we're all about, right? We're people of hope. We're people that we're hoping for something better. And that's the idea of faith, rooted in Hebrews chapter 11. Faith is a substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. And for the believer, God will reward them because they don't only believe that He is in existence, but that He will also reward them. We can see, I think, God's put something in us. He's given us the part of our chips that we can look out into the world and see, okay, there is a God. We believe there's a God. But He doesn't just want that. He wants us to be moved by what we see, to believe that He will reward us for our faith that will be challenged from time to time. And that's the kind of faith that this unreluctant widow in Luke chapter 18, she's said to have, right? She pesters the judge, give me justice, give me justice. And the judge finally says, all right, I'll give you justice just because you're bothering me. And the text tells us how much more will God grant justice to His children who ask for justice. And that's what we need to have hope for, that He will do what He says. I'll come back to you in 1 second, Delmar. I just want to say something quick before I really forget. This is really important. This is a side note. I know that there are Christians, and I know that there are people in this country that are really upset about what's happening in politics with the President of the United States and possible impeachment and who knows what. I don't particularly follow those things. That's just me. I've never really been into politics. My father was in politics for quite a large portion of his lifetime. I know what it can do to a person, so I don't really follow politics. But I will say this. We're studying something that shows us what politics does. It's never consistent. It's never constant. And there's really no reward and payout for us. we can hope for a president that is godly. We can hope for a president that will make change and will make things better for sure. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. And maybe, things aren't working out the way we would like them to. But our responsibility is not to hope in whether Congress votes against it or not, or whether the House approves it or not. Our responsibility is to trust in the God who will come and who will reward us for our faith. And we cannot be depressed and we cannot lose sight of the greater truth that God will bring everything according to His sovereign will to an end. And that's the faith that we have. That's what makes us different from everybody else, and we need to do that as well. So I just wanted to say that before I forget, because this is what world powers is going to get you. It's just divisive and all that stuff. Delmer?
And if you notice in the lives of individuals as well, that they had their ups and downs.
Yeah.
Some of them were stronger than others.
Yeah.
But the only one that we do have a record of that never was in that situation was Jesus. He lived that perfect, same line of thought. And never was taken into the...
And we like that, right? I think just looking at our lives, there's, our lives, we can reflect on whether there was a high and a low and just kind of an in-between. But we like it when things are consistent. We like it when things are getting better. And we enjoy that. And that should point us to the greater reality that God can make things better. God can make things consistent over time, where we don't have to worry about, okay, is it going to get better? Is it not going to get better? And that's the idea for these Christians, right? These Christians lived in a time where they didn't really know what was going to happen the next day. But they weren't to have confidence in that. Their confidence relied on the Jesus who said, I was dead and alive, and I have the keys of death and of Hades. He who believes in me, although he dies, will live again. John chapter 11, verse 25 and 26. And that's where our hope, our faith, needs to be as well. I'm not criticizing anybody for holding a political view, don't get me wrong. I'm just telling you what your priority and what all our priorities need to be. Julie, I think, first, then Delmer.
I think honestly your point is very valid, and it was the same point that crossed my mind in studying those chapters. I think studying Revelations has helped us understand the political climate in which has always been there and has made me, I think, no different than this can guide my life. The narrative coming out of the news can guide a society.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking that unless you have a different narrative, you believe the chaos that is going on. You feel despair. You're meant to feel despair. You're meant to feel you're losing.
Mm-hmm.
You're meant to feel it'll never get better.
Mm-hmm.
But when you study Revelations, you begin to understand that these powers have always been in place. They've never been for our benefit, and that we have a ruler, a king to follow after, and that here on this earth it may never quite work out to
Sure.
our benefit in the way we had hoped, but we now know where to be looking to, and to know that this chaos will have a very bad ending for those who have meant our demise.
Right, and obviously people that they put their purpose in life and their purpose of, just living on things like politics and money and stuff like that, they will always be disappointed. They will never find what they're looking for. Ecclesiastes obviously makes that argument very well. I the king, I sought wisdom, I sought power and riches and money and all these things, and at the end of it, it was all vanity. Vanity of vanities. And in chapter 12, he comes to the conclusion, he said, let's hear the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments, for that is the all of man. You can have hobbies, you can have all these different things, but they will never truly satisfy and give you the satisfaction that we crave, like the Word of God and like the hope that we have in heaven will. Delmer?
Yeah, I'd like to say too, I do believe that God rules and kings with men.
Yes.
Giving the people an opportunity.
Yeah.
But the best president that we ever had was George Washington, because he was the first.
There you have it. I can't argue against that. No, I don't know. But, I was going to say something. Oh, Daniel. Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar, right? He thought he was this great king, that there was never a guy like him. There was never going to be. And by the way, the person who is always in power at the time believes he's the greatest ever until the guy comes after him and, well, he thinks he's the greatest ever. It's weird. That's just what power does to the mind. But Nebuchadnezzar thought, well, I'm the greatest guy that's ever lived. Look at what I did. And God says, I will show you that the Most High rules in the realm of man, and that he gives it to whom he wishes. And Nebuchadnezzar was forced to eat grass like an animal. So the guy who thought he was the greatest, he became the lowest of the low. And he realized that the Most High rules in the realm of man and gives it to whom he wishes. There you go. Good point. All right, let's move on. Verse 9. Here is the mind which has wisdom. We've heard that phrase before. You remember just before we tackled that 666 in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, it said, here is wisdom. Every time it would seem that Revelation is gearing up to give us something that seems to be more difficult than usual, it tells us here's wisdom. And I love that because it's God's way of reminding us this can be understood, but only by the mind that has wisdom. And this wisdom is not experience in this world. It's not education from Harvard or Yale or whatever. It's wisdom that God, can you grant me the wisdom to know what you're saying here? James chapter 1, verse 5. Any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all freely. And the wisdom that is from above is pure, peaceable, righteous. It can guide us into all things. So, just want to state that. Everything from here to the rest of the chapters finished can be understood. Okay? Verse 9. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And they are 7 kings. Let me stop there for a moment. You got 7 heads, you have 7 mountains, and you got 7 kings. They're all the same thing. Okay? And by the way, they're not literal. Why? 7 heads are 7 mountains. Okay? What does that mean? Well, 7 mountains are 7 kings. You see what the Bible's telling us? It's a metaphor. It's symbols. It's representing something else. It never stops at one point and say, okay, this is literally what it is. It's simply going forth and saying 7 heads, 7 mountains, 7 kings. And that's where it stops. And the idea of a mountain, when you think about a mountain, it's strength, it's strong, it's powerful. I will say, from a historical standpoint, it is believed that Rome was built on 7 mountains or 7 hills. So therefore they were strong. And their kings or their emperors seemed to solidify that, right? They were a strong empire. In fact, Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 tells us that the 4th kingdom that is to come will be stronger than any other before them. And I think historians will agree that the Roman Empire in the ancient world was the strongest of all that preceded it. So it represents strength, it represents power, and kingdoms that are being ruled, right? Mountain in the Old Testament is always kind of a reference to king or kingdoms, always associated with strength. And that's what we're going to see here, this idea of power, the idea of strength. So I want to ask the question, are these 7 kings literal? Are we to think of 7 actual literal human kings? No, we're not. Because it's all a metaphor, it's all a symbol. So we're not dealing with 7 literal kings, but it is a description of the complete oppressive evil power of those in authority. They are completely evil. That's the number 7. It's complete. And they stand in opposition to God and His people. Now, how do we know that that's true? In chapter 13 and in verse 1, I saw the beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And we know we're not to look at that as a literal seven-headed creature. The idea there was he had complete power. In Revelation chapter 12 and in verse 3, the dragon has 7 heads. He's literally doesn't have 7 heads. He just has complete oppressive evil power. And the same thing is true here. Now, G.K. Beale, in his commentary on the book of Revelation, says, the 7 mountains and the kings represent the oppressive power of world government throughout the ages, which arrogates itself to divine prerogatives, given the number 7, and persecutes God's people when they do not submit to the evil state's false claims. The problem, and I don't, anybody here heard that before, what I'm saying? Anybody ever hear that before? Is that the first time? Be honest with me. Is this the first time you're hearing this? A lot of people are saying yes. A lot of people take this to be 7 literal kings. And I think that's part of the issue, right? Nowhere in Revelation before have we looked at the number 7 or have we looked at the idea of 10 as being literal. And so the problem I have with people that look at this as 7 being literal is this is the first time they will take it to be literal. And why would we stop here and take it literal for the first time? Because it suits us? Or it suits... Here's the thing, right? A lot of people look at this and they say it's literal 7 kings. And here's what we got going on. If you know Roman history and you know the writing of this book, a lot of people will take this and they'll say, okay, there are 7 kings in the Roman Empire going back to Octavian, Augustus Caesar, and we start counting with him because he was the first Roman emperor. So we count Octavian Augustus, we count Gaius, we count Claudius, we count Nero. We count Nero as number 5, who is not. And then you got the 5 kings, right? And then you got a king who is currently in existence. But then you had 3 kings in between, Otho, Galba, and Vitellius. They weren't real kings. They were just killing each other. And so the king that is Vespasian, and the one who is to come is Domitian. The problem that I have with that is historians don't agree who was the first king of the Roman Empire. A lot of them say it was Julius Caesar, and a lot of them say it was Augustus Caesar. Still, some do not even begin counting until you get to Gaius or Caligula. There is at least 10 different literal interpretations to this text, okay? Now, if God is giving us a book that we need to understand, do you think he is giving us multiple choice for us to choose 1 through 10? Probably not. So we're not dealing with literal 7 kings because all of those literal 7 kings poses difficult problems. And so somebody says, no, it's not dealing with 7 kings, it's dealing with 7 kingdoms. And so they begin counting from Egypt in the Old Testament. You got Egypt, Assyria. After Assyria, you got Babylon, Medo-Persia, that's number 4. Then you have Greece, number 5. 5 have fallen. 1 is, who came after Greece? Rome. And the 7th is some kind of a future power to come. That sounds pretty tempting, except nobody knows where to begin again. Some people start with Egypt. Some people start all the way in Noah's day, saying that the ancient Nineveh was the actual first kingdom. So there is no consensus, okay, based on is it 7 literal kings or 7 literal kingdoms. But we can't argue on a symbolic representation, can we? Because when you say it represents evil power, I don't think anybody can look at this and say, this is not talking about evil. This is exactly what it represents. And why would we begin to describe the 7 heads literally here when we did not try to do that in chapter 13 and chapter 12 with the devil? And we know that the devil is the one who stands in opposition to God. And we know that the devil is the one who seeks to hurt the people of God. So his 7 heads are completely evil. He is trying to mimic God, as seen by the phrase who was and is not and is about to come. And I think the point that there are 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come, is no more than a way of numbering out this way. A handful, 5 on one hand, have fallen. A handful of them are gone. One is currently reigning, but he won't last for long. And then one will come. But look in verse 11. The beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth, and he's one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. So the guy that's going to come, he's going to be destroyed too. And that's all to say this. The world powers, past, present, or future, cannot and will not overcome God. It doesn't matter how powerful they seem. It doesn't matter who they are and where they came from. It doesn't matter who's sitting on the throne. They will all fall. Because God is the King of kings and He is the Lord of lords. He is the conquering King who will defeat all. In chapter 19, verses 11 through 21. And the point that verse 11, I think, is making, the beast which was and is not is himself also an eighth, but one of the 7. He is trying to make himself look different than all the other guys. But God's telling us, no, he's just like them. Which means what? He's going to be destroyed just like them too. He goes to destruction. Just like what? The beast in verse 8 goes to destruction. So his 7 heads seem impressive at first. In fact, it seems like he has some sort of a resurrection, only to come and realize that God is the one who rules in the realm of mankind, and He gives it to whom He wishes. I don't know if it's literal or not. I think the evidence strongly counters that literal interpretation. Again, I do not believe that God's wisdom would say to us, interpret this literally, just so that we could look at a list that numbers 1 through 10 and choose one of those that fits it best. I don't think that's what God is doing. I think God is saying, look at it the way I gave it to you. What is the concept? What is the meaning? Here's the mind that has wisdom. I will destroy them. And I think that's God's purpose and point in these verses. All right, let's have some questions, thoughts, and comments now come out. Elmer?
God wouldn't give us something that we would have to rely on history.
And man, absolutely. Absolutely, no question. Julie?
Well, I think that the thing I've struggled with all along is trying to realize that this was also written for those that understood it back then, but then also for us in the future of what is yet to come. So if there was 7 kingdoms, 8 kingdoms, we're still not living under this 8th kingdom.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You know.
And you'll hear this argument made by some people. Oh, but these people would have realized who these 7 kings were. I don't believe so. I don't think so. If historians like Tacitus didn't know who to start counting with, what gives us any idea that the Christians would know? Tacitus was political. He was a Roman senator. He didn't even know which emperor to start to count with. And we're saying people who were not involved in politics would? Really? It just doesn't. It just doesn't make sense what we're dealing with here. It's entirely symbolic, and it's pointing us to a concept that world powers will not prevail against God, because He is truly the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Steve?
This aspect of understanding the overall plan of God is because we always want the nitty-gritty. We always want to know.
Our curiosity is wanting to know the details. Exactly.
But when you think about God's people has always been in power or in places of position in people's government. And that doesn't mean that, that we are without hope.
Mm-hmm.
As Abraham was told by God, his people would be in bondage for 400 years. Bad times. And we read that about in Exodus.
Yeah.
Bad times.
Bad times.
Yet before that, we have Joseph, who's in there. He rises to one of the highest positions in the government. So they recognize God. Pharaoh recognized that God is here by
Mm-hmm.
God is still with them.
Yeah. And that's
Even in bad times that they may be facing.
That's absolutely correct. And, political powers often do not saying this is always true, but they often do not consider God in what they do. Okay? Which will often mean bad things for the people who do consider God in what they do. And oftentimes that will mean for us to what? Hold fast to God. And we are told in Romans chapter 13 that we need to submit to the government. We need to pay our taxes. We need to do the things that we need to do insofar as it's not sinful, insofar as they're not asking us to deny Jesus, which these people were doing. And as long as we can do that, then that's our responsibility. I mean, I have opinions and I have views about things that I will not say in public. And I can talk about it in private, that's just me, but I just don't think that our responsibility as far as it goes is to, sit in front of the television and wait to see who the next president will be, because it's just going to make our lives so much better. God's going to make our lives better. It's not the president or some man or somebody else. It's God. He died for us, not some man, and He is the one that will reward our faith. Now look, there's a lot more that we could talk about there. There's a lot more in your outline. Please look at that. But that's pretty much the gist of it, okay? I'm not going to belabor the point here. And again, if you want to talk a little bit about me, maybe you disagree with me about these literal kings and all that stuff, I'd be happy to sit down with you and give you more evidence and maybe even bring up some of those historical documents to show you why I don't think it's literal. But we're going to look at the same thing, Lord willing, on Wednesday with the 10 horns. I don't believe those are literal. I think that's a symbol. And 7 and 10 are two numbers that are highly symbolic in this book, which would lead us to that conclusion that God's trying to convey with us a concept. But the other thing, though, I don't know if you noticed this, we started out chapter 17 by looking at the woman, then the beast. The interpretation to the vision is given in reverse. Beast, then the woman. And I think there's a point to that. We'll talk about that beginning on Wednesday. I appreciate your attention and your comments. No, I got it. I appreciate that. Yeah. No, I got it taken care of. I appreciate it. But I did not put the songs in yet, so appreciate it if you do that. How you doing?
Good. How about you?
Good, doing well.
What's wrong?
Nothing? Oh, I haven't.